The room fell silent as Judge Britt Grant leaned forward, eyes narrowing, her voice slicing through the tension like a sharpened blade. "Do you really think your version of justice applies here, Congresswoman?" The words landed with the weight of accusation, but it wasn't the question itself that shocked the audience. It was the audacity, the arrogance, the implication that someone like Jasmine Crockett could be out of her depth. Cameras captured every twitch, every flash of disbelief, and millions at home felt their hearts skip a beat. Outside the courtroom, the city buzzed with anticipation, as if the streets themselves sensed the collision that was about to unfold. On social media, hashtags lit up in seconds, warning, #Crockett versus Grant, witness history. Opinions erupted in fragmented bursts, outrage, excitement, and disbelief mingling into a combustible cloud of emotion. People couldn't look away. They weren't just watching a debate. They were watching a moment that could define a nation's understanding of fairness, courage, and truth. The camera cut to Jasmine Crockett, standing calm yet resolute, her fingers brushing the edge of the podium. There was no flinch, no tremor, only the quiet storm of confidence that comes from a lifetime of fighting against stacked odds. She had faced condescension before, dismissive remarks aimed at undermining her very presence, but today felt different. The stakes were higher, the air heavier, and every eye in that room seemed to measure her worth before she had even spoken. Then came the line that sent a collective gasp through the chamber. "Perhaps some of us are better suited to sit quietly and observe than to legislate." The words landed with a smug certainty, designed to humiliate, to provoke fear. But instead of retreating, Jasmine's eyes locked with Grant's, unflinching. A silence stretched across the courtroom that seemed to last an eternity, punctuated only by the shallow breaths of onlookers who knew they were witnessing something rare, an unspoken challenge, a brewing storm of confrontation that would not be contained. Every journalist, every live-streaming commentator, every scrolling viewer felt the same surge of disbelief and curiosity. Who would emerge stronger? Who would bend, and who would stand firm? The answer was just beyond the next word, the next reaction, and everyone sensed it. But what happened next would leave the nation questioning everything. To understand the weight of this confrontation, one must step back and see the forces at play. Jasmine Crockett was not just another politician in another scripted hearing. She embodied the hopes of communities too often overlooked, voices too long silenced. Her rise had been marked by relentless dedication, a career shaped by advocacy for immigrants, workers, and the marginalized. Every speech, every vote, every courtroom appearance was a declaration that dignity and justice were not negotiable. They were non-negotiable rights. On the other side of the room, Judge Britt Grant represented an entirely different ethos. Her reputation for sharp precision was matched only by whispers of partisanship, of judgments influenced more by ideology than fairness. To many observers, Grant was the embodiment of arrogance cloaked in authority. The courtroom was more than a stage. It was a battleground where principles, power, and perception collided. One misstep, one carefully hidden bias exposed, could ripple far beyond the marble walls and into the lives of millions watching, tweeting, and waiting for a glimpse of moral clarity. This was not merely about a debate or a legal nuance. It was about the identity of a nation at a crossroads. In neighborhoods from Houston to Chicago, families gathered around screens, eyes wide, as they sensed something bigger than politics unfolding. Could someone like Jasmine really stand her ground against a figure with that much institutional clout? The question hung in the air, electric and tense. The stakes were immense. A symbolic victory here could send a message that courage, integrity, and empathy mattered more than wealth, lineage, or influence.
A failure could reinforce the status quo, the quiet resignation that systemic power could never be challenged. Meanwhile, social media was already shaping its own narrative. Clips of previous debates, tweets dissecting body language, and commentary threads debating the moral authority of each figure swirled into a collective storm. Each post, each reaction, amplified the tension, creating a collective anticipation that was almost tangible. As if the country itself were holding its breath, waiting to see whose values would prevail, whose voice would carry more than rhetoric, whose presence would resonate longer than any courtroom applause. Crockett's supporters saw more than a politician. They saw a mirror reflecting their own struggles and aspirations. Every insult she had endured, every dismissal she had faced, now framed this moment as pivotal. It was no longer just a debate. It was an assertion of identity, an affirmation that merit, courage, and resilience could still defy entrenched systems. Every word she was about to speak would carry that weight, and every pause, every glance would be read as a declaration of principle. And in the shadows, beyond a public eye, the antagonist was already maneuvering. Behind the polished facade of composure, strategies were being rehearsed, attacks rehearsed, and confidence meticulously projected. Grant was preparing a move that no one saw coming, a calculated strike designed to undermine, unsettle, and dominate. The tension was no longer theoretical. It was imminent, a storm brewing with precision and intent.
Judge Britt Grant's rise to prominence had been as rapid as it was controversial. On paper, she was the embodiment of success: Ivy League education, prestigious clerkships, and a career that shimmered with accolades. But beneath the polished exterior lay a history marked by contradictions that few dared to confront. She projected the image of unshakable authority, yet every close examination revealed a series of decisions that betrayed bias, political opportunism, and an unwavering loyalty to power rather than principle. Her early career had been defined by moments that, in hindsight, painted a pattern. In one high-profile case, she ruled in favor of corporate interests against small business owners, ignoring mounting evidence of ethical misconduct by the corporation. The ruling was applauded in certain circles, earning her praise from political allies, but it sparked outrage among communities who saw it as a dismissal of fairness and justice. It was a warning sign, subtle yet persistent. Grant's judgment, though technically sound, often aligned more with influence than with integrity. Her public statements, too, were riddled with contradictions. She preached impartiality while simultaneously echoing partisan rhetoric in interviews and speeches. One moment she would claim that the law applied equally to all, and the next she would undermine those very principles in subtle but unmistakable ways. Critics began to notice a pattern of self-interest, the kind that masqueraded as principled decision-making. A veneer of respectability carefully crafted to shield ambition from scrutiny. Social media and investigative reporters slowly chipped away at the facade, exposing inconsistencies that few mainstream outlets dared to amplify. Grant's arrogance was her most visible trait. Colleagues recounted stories of dismissive behavior toward interns, aides, and junior clerks, anecdotes that painted a picture of someone who measured her worth by how effectively she could assert dominance over others. In meetings, she often silenced dissent with a pointed question or a cold stare, cultivating an aura of untouchable authority. To those who observed her from the inner circle, it was both fascinating and infuriating, a charisma laced with intimidation, a brilliance dimmed by hubris. But it wasn't merely arrogance that defined her, it was the way she weaponized it. Grant had learned early that projecting confidence, even in the face of weak reasoning, could sway outcomes. In debates, she would interrupt opponents with surgical precision, framing them as naive or uninformed, while she maintained the image of control. Her ability to manipulate perception was formidable, earning her victories in arenas where truth alone might have failed. It was a skill honed over years, a combination of intellect, performance, and calculated aggression that made her both respected and feared. But beneath the surface of these successes, cracks had begun to form. Friends and allies whispered about moments of overreach, decisions made for expediency rather than justice, and alliances forged not from shared values, but from convenience. There were times when her rulings were overturned on appeal, not due to incompetence, but because the moral and ethical underpinnings were weak. Every overturned case was a blemish on a record otherwise celebrated as flawless. And every controversy, every lapse of judgment had left traces that lingered quietly, waiting for the right moment or the right challenger to expose them. Grant's personal ideology, too, revealed tension. While she publicly championed a narrative of fairness and meritocracy, her private statements, selectively leaked, suggested a disdain for those she deemed unworthy, particularly immigrants and minority communities striving for representation. It was this duality, public respectability versus private prejudice, that made her simultaneously formidable and flawed. To some, she was a genius of the courtroom. To others, a cautionary tale of ambition unmoored from conscience. By the time she entered the confrontation with Jasmine Crockett, Grant had accumulated both power and enemies. The arrogance that once shielded her now made her predictable to those paying close attention. Each past misstep, each controversial ruling, each dismissal of dissent formed a roadmap for how she could be challenged, how her carefully constructed image could unravel. And yet she remained dangerously confident, believing that no one could match her experience, her precision, or her control over the narrative. But every villain has a weakness, and soon it would be exposed in the most unexpected way.
Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin under the bright lights of a courtroom or in the polished halls of politics. It began in neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce, where the weight of systemic inequality pressed on every corner, and where ambition was often met with skepticism. She was born to parents who understood sacrifice, not in abstract terms, but in the daily rhythm of work and care. Long hours at multiple jobs, nights spent helping neighbors, and weekends filled with community service shaped a young girl who learned early that dignity and integrity were not privileges, they were responsibilities. From the beginning, Jasmine demonstrated a rare combination of intellect and empathy. In school, she excelled academically, not for accolades, but because she believed knowledge was a tool to create tangible change. Teachers recalled her unwavering curiosity, her questions that cut to the heart of fairness, and her determination to uplift those around her. Yet her journey was never easy. She faced the subtle and not-so-subtle barriers imposed on women of color, lowered expectations, dismissive attitudes, and a society that often questioned whether someone like her belonged in spaces of influence. Each obstacle, however, became a crucible, refining her resolve rather than diminishing it. Her path to public service was shaped by moments of profound challenge. Early in her career, she took on cases that others avoided, representing immigrants fighting unjust deportation orders, advocating for workers whose voices had been silenced by corporate might, and defending families navigating a system stacked against them. These were not glamorous assignments, nor were they politically expedient. They were acts of moral courage, each demanding long hours, emotional investment, and personal sacrifice. Friends remember her returning from courtrooms late at night, exhausted but unbroken, driven by a conviction that justice was not optional. In law school, Jasmine encountered a microcosm of the biases she would face throughout her career. Professors questioned her approach, classmates doubted her capability, and some even dismissed her contributions. Yet she persisted, not through arrogance, but through quiet mastery. Research meticulously crafted, arguments presented with clarity and compassion, and a steadfast refusal to compromise her principles. It was during these years that she honed the skills that would make her formidable in confrontation, listening as intently as speaking, weighing facts with precision, and turning perceived weakness into strategic advantage. Her political journey was equally shaped by empathy and resilience. When she entered Congress, she carried the stories of those who had been ignored. Families struggling to access health care, immigrants navigating complex and often hostile systems, and communities whose needs were overlooked by those in power. She became a voice not only for legislation, but for hope, demonstrating that advocacy could be both effective and humane. Her speeches, often delivered with calm authority, resonated because they were grounded in lived experience, in a deep understanding of struggle, and in an unwavering belief that equity was attainable. What set Jasmine apart was not just her intelligence or experience, but her moral compass. She understood that leadership was not about dominance or control, it was about responsibility. Every decision, every public stance, every moment in the spotlight was weighed against a simple but profound question. Does this advance justice? Does this honor the dignity of those who cannot speak for themselves? In a world where compromise often meant surrendering principle, Jasmine consistently chose the harder path, the one that demanded courage, persistence, and unwavering clarity. Her journey was also personal. She carried with her the lessons of her family, the sacrifices they had made, and the pride of generations who had dreamed of a society that would see her for her ability, not her background. She internalized these lessons, transforming them into a quiet yet potent strength, a strength that allowed her to stand unshaken when others sought to intimidate, belittle, or undermine. This was the foundation of her resilience, the core of the hero who would soon confront one of the most formidable antagonists she had ever faced. Every debate she had entered before, every courtroom she had walked into, every instance of systemic bias she had navigated, had been preparation for this exact moment. The confrontation ahead was not a gamble. It was the culmination of years of learning, striving, and refusing to bow to injustice. The hero who faced Judge Britt Grant was a product of adversity, experience, and unyielding principle, a combination that few could match and fewer could intimidate. Armed with this resilience, the hero stepped into the arena, ready to face a challenge that would test everything.
The courtroom air thickened as the debate began in earnest. Judge Britt Grant opened with a carefully rehearsed volley, each word sharpened to unsettle, each phrase a subtle challenge. Congresswoman Crockett, your policies suggest an idealism that is admirable, yet impractical, she said, her voice carrying the precision of someone accustomed to control. It was meant to provoke, to force a defensive reaction, and for a fleeting moment, the room held its collective breath. But Jasmine remained steady. She inhaled calmly, eyes steady, posture unyielding. Her response was measured, deliberate, a masterclass in composure. Admirable or not, progress has never come from retreating from our responsibilities, she said, her tone unwavering, resonating with a quiet authority that demanded attention. The crowd shifted, subtle murmurs rising. This was more than a rebuttal. It was a statement of principle, a declaration that she would not be intimidated. Grant's veneer began to crack. A twitch of the eyebrow, a brief hesitation, hints of frustration flickering across her expression. She tried again, pressing with sharper accusations, questioning Crockett's record, insinuating inexperience. How can you claim to understand the complexities of our system when so many have failed under your proposals? Her words were meant to destabilize, to bait the hero into faltering. Crockett's composure only deepened. She allowed the pause to stretch, letting the weight of the question hang in the room. Then, with deliberate clarity, she outlined the successes she had achieved, the lives improved by her advocacy, the communities empowered by her actions. Every statistic, every anecdote was carefully chosen to highlight competence without arrogance. Each point landed like a stone in a still pond, rippling outward to reach the audience, both in the room and millions watching from home. The tension escalated with each exchange. Grant's interruptions became more frequent, her words sharper, laced with barely concealed disdain. Yet Jasmine never raised her voice, never allowed the bait to draw her into emotional retaliation. It was a performance of restraint and intellect, one that turned aggression into an opportunity to educate, to illuminate the difference between spectacle and substance. Every pause, every careful glance became a signal. Strength was not in dominance, but in calm conviction. Audience reactions intensified. Cameras caught subtle gasps, whispered exchanges among colleagues, the leaning in of journalists sensing a shift in momentum. Online, commentators speculated in real time. Crockett isn't just defending herself, she's dismantling Grant's narrative with precision. The anticipation was electric, a collective pulse of suspense, gripping everyone who had tuned in. And then came the moment of visible crack. Grant's confident assertions faltered under the precision of Crockett's facts, her rhetorical elegance leaving the judge momentarily exposed. The smirk that had once defined her posture disappeared, replaced by a fleeting frown, a subtle shift betraying irritation. It was a turning point, though still fragile. A hero's calm against a villain's unraveling, the scales tipping imperceptibly but unmistakably. Every exchange after that carried amplified tension. The room hung on every syllable, every pause charged with the knowledge that history was being made. The drama was cinematic, every word a beat in a story that audiences felt in their bones, a narrative of principle versus arrogance, empathy versus ego. And then, in a moment that would be replayed endlessly, the hero delivered a line that would change the game.
The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, her posture steady, her voice calm, but filled with unshakable authority. She didn't raise it to match Judge Britt Grant's sharp tone. She didn't lunge for theatrics or grandstanding. Instead, she leaned into precision, letting each word land with measured weight. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, every camera trained, every social media livestream capturing the moment in real time. "Let's be clear," she began, her voice cutting through the tension like sunlight breaking a storm cloud. "Justice is not determined by intimidation, nor is it defined by titles or fear. It is defined by action, by evidence, and by the courage to do what is right even when it is inconvenient." She paused deliberately, letting the first ripple of murmurs wash over the audience. There was no arrogance in her tone, only a quiet authority that demanded reflection. Then came the first blow, subtle but devastating. She outlined a series of rulings Grant had made in the past, highlighting inconsistencies between the judge's public statements of impartiality and the outcomes of her decisions. In case after case, outcomes favored influence over fairness, Crockett said, producing citations, precedent references, and clear evidence of patterns. Every example was laid out methodically, each one a brick in a wall built not from opinion but undeniable fact. The room shifted. Journalists leaning closer, assistants whispering, and Grant's composure beginning to flicker, ever so slightly. Crockett did not pause for applause. There was none. Just the mounting tension of undeniable truth. She then addressed the insinuation of inexperience that had been lobbed at her earlier. Calmly, she recounted her victories. Legislation passed that protected workers' rights, legal battles won against systemic injustice, and advocacy that had directly improved the lives of those most vulnerable. Each anecdote was precise, relatable, and reinforced her credibility, illustrating a record built on action rather than rhetoric. Then came the moment of strategic brilliance. She framed Grant's arrogance not as an abstract flaw, but as a risk to the integrity of the courtroom itself.
Authority without accountability, Crockett explained, is a danger to the people it is meant to serve. And the people, she emphasized, scanning the room slowly, deserve truth, transparency, and a voice that listens rather than dismisses. Every word landed like a hammer, each pause creating a weighty silence, forcing the audience to absorb the gravity of her message. Grant attempted a rebuttal, a half-smile masking rising tension. "Your idealism is charming, Congresswoman," she said, her voice slightly tighter than before. But Crockett didn't flinch. She let the comment hang, then systematically dismantled it with logic and evidence, turning what was intended as a condescending dismissal into a demonstration of her mastery over both substance and presentation. Every factual point she made was paired with moral clarity, framing the debate not just as a clash of egos, but as a reckoning of values. The courtroom's reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispered commentary, subtle nods of admiration, and even flashes of awe from unexpected corners. Cameras caught the flicker of doubt in Grant's eyes, the slight bite of her lip, the imperceptible tightening of her posture. Social media erupted simultaneously, clips were shared, analysts paused to rewatch segments, and hashtags ignited. Hashtag Crockett wins, hashtag justice prevails, hashtag mic drop moment. The momentum had shifted. What began as a confrontation designed to intimidate had turned into a public dismantling of the antagonist's facade. Step by step, Crockett continued to build her case, weaving in stories of human impact. She recounted a family threatened by unjust eviction laws, workers denied fair wages, and immigrants fighting to remain in a country they called home. Every example was paired with evidence, illustrating not only competence, but empathy, transforming abstract debate into lived reality. She connected the personal to the systemic, showing that the stakes were not just theoretical, but human, tangible, and immediate. The climax of her counterattack came with precision timing. She recounted the moment Grant had implied that Crockett's proposals were naive, juxtaposing it with documented successes where cautious critics had once doubted her plans. Each reveal was punctuated with pauses, allowing the audience to draw connections, to see the disparity between bravado and accomplishment. Her calm delivery amplified the effect, showing that authority grounded in principle always outlasts authority built on ego. At this point, cracks in Grant's confidence were undeniable. Her carefully rehearsed lines faltered, her tone grew clipped, and subtle gestures betrayed her uncertainty. A hand twitching, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a pause too long before attempting a retort. The courtroom sensed the imbalance. The hero was unshakable, the antagonist unraveling. Every observer, whether in the room or online, felt the tension tip, the scales tilting toward clarity, integrity, and truth. Crockett concluded with a final resounding declaration. Leadership is not measured by intimidation, but by service. Justice is not claimed, it is earned. And the people deserve leaders who uphold their dignity, not diminish it. The words hung in the room, heavy, undeniable, and electric. Silence followed, a charged silence of recognition, of understanding, of awe at the sheer precision and moral force of her argument. The aftermath was instantaneous. The crowd exhaled collectively, some in shock, some in admiration, and social media erupted. Commentators dissected every phrase, and supporters erupted in praise that echoed far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The villain's confidence had crumbled under the weight of truth, and the hero's unyielding composure had created a defining moment that would be remembered, shared, and celebrated. The counterattack was complete. Jasmine Crockett had not only defended herself, she had redefined the battlefield, turning confrontation into a demonstration of principle, skill, and humanity. The message was clear. Courage and integrity could dismantle arrogance, and evidence paired with empathy could triumph over intimidation. The world could hardly believe what had just unfolded in that room.
The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her final words, the room seemed to pulse with energy. Cameras clicked frantically, capturing expressions of awe, disbelief, and quiet vindication. Reporters whispered into microphones, live streams froze and rewound, and within seconds, clips of her calm, methodical dismantling of Judge Britt Grant flooded social media. On Twitter, the hashtags were immediate and unstoppable. Hashtag Crockett stands tall,
hashtag justice over arrogance, hashtag mic drop moment. Each post carried not just the story of a single debate, but a narrative of triumph that resonated deeply with millions who had long felt overlooked and unheard. Memes and GIFs proliferated within minutes. Crockett's composed gaze, juxtaposed with Grant's subtle signs of unease, became symbols of resilience overcoming intimidation. Influencers, political commentators, and ordinary users alike amplified the moment, dissecting every exchange, every pause, every precise turn of phrase. The debate was no longer confined to a courtroom. It had become a national conversation, a cultural touchstone that demanded attention. Across news outlets, opinion segments aired in rapid succession. Some praised Crockett's skillful poise, highlighting her ability to combine empathy with precision. Others noted the rarity of such a clear moral victory in public debate, a confrontation where intellect and dignity prevailed over bluster and intimidation. The coverage framed her as a figure capable of challenging systemic power while inspiring a broader audience to demand accountability from those in positions of authority. The ripple effect was immediate. In communities across the country, people shared videos and screenshots, sparking discussions in living rooms, classrooms, and offices. Families spoke about what they had witnessed, debating the implications of Crockett's victory for representation, equity, and justice. In immigrant communities, young viewers expressed pride, seeing in her a reflection of their own aspirations and struggles. Social media comments overflowed with statements of identification. "She spoke for us. Finally, someone refuses to back down. This is the courage we need." Politically, the scene sent shockwaves. Analysts speculated on how this display of moral and intellectual authority could influence upcoming legislation and leadership contests. Allies of Crockett celebrated her ability to shift public perception, while detractors were forced to recalibrate, recognizing that her triumph had been as much about perception as it was about policy. The power dynamic, previously assumed to favor Grant, had been decisively challenged, and the effects would reverberate in ways both immediate and long-term. Even beyond politics, the moment became a cultural signal. Discussions emerged about the role of civility and composure in leadership, the value of preparation over theatrics, and the enduring power of empathy paired with skill. Educators used clips of the debate to illustrate argumentation and rhetorical strategy. Community organizations shared segments to inspire engagement and civic action. The imagery of a hero standing firm against arrogance captured imaginations in a way that transcended ideology, appealing to universal values of fairness, resilience, and moral courage. Public reactions were layered and intense. Some viewers replayed the clips repeatedly, analyzing facial expressions and tone for subtle cues. Others shared the moment with friends and family, framing it as a teaching tool about dignity and persistence. Social media threads became repositories of collective admiration, punctuated with GIFs, quotes, and celebratory commentary. The debate, in essence, had transformed into a shared experience, a story that connected viewers across geography, background, and belief, united by the simple yet profound thrill of witnessing principle triumph over intimidation. Amid the flood of digital response, the human element was palpable. Supporters described feeling inspired to engage more actively in civic life, to advocate with courage in workplaces, classrooms, and local governments. Immigrant families saw in Crockett's resilience a reflection of their own daily struggles and triumphs. Young viewers, particularly women and people of color, expressed a sense of validation and possibility, recognizing that authority and respect could be earned without sacrificing authenticity or moral clarity. Every tweet, share, comment, and meme contributed to a growing narrative,
a story where courage and preparation could dismantle hubris, where empathy and evidence could prevail over bluster. It was more than a momentary victory, it was a cultural reset, a reaffirmation of what leadership could look like when grounded in principle. The shockwaves were real, tangible, and deeply felt, creating a shared sense of excitement, pride, and hope. But the story didn't end there. Its implications would resonate far beyond the debate stage.
In the stillness that followed the courtroom storm, Jasmine Crockett did something remarkable. She let the moment breathe. She didn't boast, she didn't gloat, she simply framed the confrontation not as a victory over an opponent, but as a reminder of what principled action could achieve. Her words, calm yet resonant, transformed a heated debate into a moral lesson for everyone watching. We are defined not by the challenges we face, but by the courage we summon to meet them, she said. Integrity is not measured by how loudly we can assert ourselves, but by how consistently we act in service of justice. For viewers across the nation, her statement crystallized the emotional journey they had witnessed. This was not just a politician prevailing in a single debate. It was a living example of dignity in action, a demonstration that preparation, resilience, and moral clarity could overcome intimidation, arrogance, and systemic pressure. Those who had cheered for her moments ago now felt a deeper resonance. This was a call to live with courage in their own communities, to stand for principles even when the odds seemed stacked against them. Crockett reframed the confrontation as more than a clash between two individuals. She highlighted the broader stakes, the ideals of fairness, accountability, and public service that underpin a functioning society. When we act with purpose and integrity, she not only defends ourselves, but we uplift everyone who depends on a system that too often forgets them. Her words reminded the audience that leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege, and that each of us has a role to play in creating a more just world. She also acknowledged the human dimension of the struggle. The debate had been intense, yes, but the lesson lay in empathy and resilience. Challenges will come, and there will always be forces that try to diminish us, to make us doubt our worth. But our response is what matters. We can choose fear or we can choose principle. We can choose silence or we can choose action. Each phrase was a blueprint for courage, a message that echoed far beyond the courtroom, urging viewers to consider how they could stand firm in their own lives, whether defending someone's rights, advocating for a cause, or simply refusing to compromise on truth. Her delivery combined humility with authority. There was no triumphalism, only the steady assurance that integrity and perseverance matter more than theatrics or intimidation. The audience, both present and watching remotely, absorbed the lesson instinctively. This was a model of leadership rooted in action, empathy, and unwavering moral clarity. People shared screenshots, quotes, and reflections online, turning her words into guiding principles that would circulate long after the debate clips faded from view. In reframing the conflict, Crockett also offered inspiration to those who had long felt powerless. Immigrants, young activists, and marginalized communities saw in her a mirror of their own struggles and aspirations. They understood that standing firm in the face of opposition was not just possible, it could be transformative. Her victory was not only personal, it was collective, a validation of the potential each person carries to challenge injustice and assert dignity. Ultimately, the resolution was simple yet profound. Courage, when paired with principle, produces change. Integrity, when maintained under pressure, inspires action. And service, when prioritized over self-interest, creates lasting impact. By embodying these values in the crucible of confrontation, Crockett delivered more than a rebuttal. She delivered a universal lesson that could shape not just policy, but character, culture, and community. And so a moment of chaos became a symbol of what we can achieve when courage meets principle.
Jasmine Crockett's triumph was more than a courtroom victory. It was a reminder that dignity, courage, and principle can prevail even in the face of intimidation. The confrontation with Judge Britt Grant captured a moment that resonated far beyond the walls of that room, showing that preparation, empathy, and moral clarity are the true measures of leadership. It wasn't just about one debate. It was about what we all can achieve when we refuse to be silenced and stand firmly for justice. This story matters because it reflects our shared values. Millions watching saw someone who mirrored their own struggles, their own aspirations, and their own dreams of a fairer, more equitable society. From immigrants seeking recognition to activists striving for change, Crockett's calm authority offered validation. Your voice matters, your principles matter, and your courage can move mountains. Every precise word, every measured pause, and every act of integrity reminded viewers that standing up is always worth it, even when the stakes are high. If this moment inspired you, don't let it end here. Share this video with friends, family, and anyone who believes in the power of integrity over arrogance. Comment below with the actions you're taking to stand for what's right, and join a community that values courage, empathy, and accountability. Subscribe to the channel to witness more stories where heroes rise against seemingly impossible odds, and history is made not by intimidation, but by principle. Remember, courage is contagious, and integrity is unstoppable. When we stand together, inspired by those who refuse to compromise their values, we shape a world that reflects our highest ideals. Let Jasmine Crockett's moment be a spark, one that reminds us all that justice, dignity, and moral clarity are worth fighting for every single day.